Welcome back to the channel. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap expert, and in this video, I'm excited to talk about the Golden State Warriors because for the first time in years, they've got some roster building options. Over the past few seasons, they've been pretty limited in terms of what they could do to the roster because they have had such an expensive payroll. And that's about to change. So, I want to go over some roster scenarios that I put together. But before I do, if you're new to the channel or been here before, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Still a pretty new channel, about a month old, so it would help with its growth a lot. Now, for context, I want to illustrate the Warriors' spending over the past decade. So, this is between 2014 2015 when they won their first championship and last season 23-24. So, the middle column represents their tax penalties, which is what they have to spend for being over the luxury tax threshold for that season. And this right column represents the total of their luxury tax penalties if they pay tax that year and their general payroll combined. And when you put it all together, they spent $678 million in tax penalties in those 9 years and just over $2 billion in total expenses. And that is significantly more than any other team during that span. And the crazy thing is that nearly half of all that spending came just within the last 3 years. And that's because they were designated as repeat taxpayers. That's a designation that's made when you've been in the tax for too long and you basically have to pay higher tax rates. And they got it because they were in the tax 3 times between 2017 and 2021. So as you can see, just based on all the spending that they just did over this past 9 years, you can see why they'd like to keep their payroll relatively controlled if possible, especially since this team is not looking like a title contender right now. So here's the Warriors payroll so far heading into the offseason. You can see it on the Warriors page on capsheet.com. However, I think it's going to look very different by the time we get to July 1st. Main reasons because of Chris Paul and Kevon Looney. Chris Paul's got that $30 million salary. It's non-guaranteed, and it becomes fully guaranteed if not waived by June 28th. And one thing that has been floated around is a possibility that they push back that guarantee. In case a trade comes along in which they need to use his salary for a big trade. And that would be advantageous for Paul because that would require them to increase his partial guarantee to make the salary matching work, and he could end up making more money that way than on the free agency market potentially. Kevon Looney, it's been reported by The Athletic that the Warriors plan to waive him. He's got a $3 million partial guarantee, and his guarantee date is June 24th, I believe. And I think that is the move to make. And if the Warriors are going to do it, at that point, they could potentially bring him back, but they probably only offer him the minimum. And at that case, if you're Kevon Looney, you might want to move on from that situation. And then one other player to note, Gary Payton. He's got that $9.1 million player option, which you'd think he'd pick up. However, he did say following the Warriors' loss to the Kings that ended their season that he's open to declining it and re-signing with the Warriors on a long-term deal that would have a smaller starting amount than that salary he's set to make. So because of all these variables, this cap sheet isn't totally relevant. So here's a cap sheet that could be a more accurate representation of their payroll heading into July 1st. So I waived Chris Paul and Kevon Looney, which I think are the most likely outcomes. As you can see, Kevon Looney's $3 million is now counting as dead money. And I gave Gary Payton roughly a 20% pay cut on his salary. That could allow him to re-sign for roughly 4 years, $30 million. I don't know if that'll be enough for him to do it, but just an idea of what I could see, how I could see that going down. Now they are entering the offseason roughly $35 million below the luxury tax line, giving them enough flexibility to re-sign Klay Thompson and field the rest of the roster while staying below the tax. And I think that staying below that $171.3 million threshold, like I mentioned earlier, will be a priority unless they can add an all-star to the mix. And as you can see, the Warriors are not in a position to generate cap space if Klay Thompson leaves. If he doesn't return, I just think they simply elevate Moses Moody, Brandon Pajemski to higher roles and try to get an impact player with the mid-level exception. So here's a basic projection of how I could see the Warriors roster looking like if they bring back Klay Thompson and rework Gary Payton's deal. Now, obviously, the Klay Thompson situation is very much up in the air. They've been far apart on extension talks all season. And now recently he just unfollowed the Warriors on Instagram and I suppose deleted a bunch of posts with them. But personally, I think he's a sub $20 million player, all things considered. But if the Warriors do bring him back, I imagine he's going to get a little more than that. So I'm plugging him in with roughly $22.5 million first year salary, allows him to get like roughly 2 for 45 or 3 for 70. And the big question is the years. So the Warriors reportedly offered him a 2 year, $48 million contract before the season started, which he declined. So that kind of tells me that if he were to demand more years, they probably wouldn't want them fully guaranteed beyond the first 2 years. And that could make his contract similar to the Chris Paul contract, where the Warriors can then take things year by year. They get a little insurance on it in case he gets a long deal. Now, I also applied the stretch provision on Kevon Looney's dead money. So what that basically means is that they're going to divide his $3 million into $1 million payments over the next 3 seasons. So they get about $2 million in relief for this upcoming season. The only downside to this is that if they do it, they wouldn't be able to re-sign Looney at all over the next 3 seasons. But I think there's a very good chance they go ahead and do this anyways. So I included the rework salary for Gary Payton, 3 minimum players, and their second round pick to field the rest of the roster. And they finish well below the tax. Very basic stuff. Now, you might be asking if the Warriors can also use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception starting at just under $13 million on this particular build. And I'm skeptical that they'll be able to comfortably use it for several reasons. For one, they would be hard capped to the first apron, meaning if they use that amount, they would not be able to exceed that $178.7 million amount for any reason at all. And they might want to keep their flexibility open in case a trade opportunity comes down the line that might require them to significantly increase payroll and even go over that amount. The other reason is that using the entire mid-level exception with this build would take them over the luxury tax. And I just don't think that the organization is going to want to pay tax for essentially the same group as last year, with the exception of bringing in another high-paid role player. I think their biggest need with the exception right now is arguably at center, especially if Looney's not coming back. But I don't think you're going to need to use the whole amount on one of the better reserve centers that you can get with it. You can pursue someone like Precious Achua or Xavier Tillman, just to name a few if they want to go that route with it. But they could also easily just find a decent center for the minimum. So I'm not sure using the exception is really threading the needle for them. I think this roster is already pretty deep when you look at it, especially when considering all these young players that need to play a lot of minutes. They already have a 9-man rotation without doing anything, assuming they bring back Klay and Gary Payton. And now I want to get into the type of scenario where the Warriors would definitely be okay with being taxpayers, and that's if they could trade for an all-star. So for my example, I'm going to have a little fun with it and talk about LeBron James, mainly because it was real that the Warriors inquired about him at last year's trade deadline. It was a big story, and I really wanted to talk about it, but I didn't have my channel yet, and the mechanics were just super interesting to me. So LeBron would need to opt into his $51.4 million player option instead of becoming a free agent, because if he were to get signed and traded to the Warriors, then they would not be allowed to exceed that $178.7 million amount for the rest of the season. And that would cause some serious roster building issues in terms of fielding the rest of the roster. Now, this is a type of scenario in which Chris Paul will get involved and have his partial guarantee increased so he can be traded. So to keep it simple, I had them sending out Chris Paul and Andrew Wiggins. I'm sure the trade would be expanded to include multiple teams because maybe the Lakers don't want to take those guys back. And I'm sure they'd also want some young players like Kuminga or Moody or Pajemski. But I'm just going to keep it simple. It's Paul and Wiggins, and the Warriors probably try to just make it a pick-space package that can trade a maximum of 2 first-round picks in 2025 and 27 and 2026 and 2028. And when you put it all together, the Warriors will be a very big taxpayer while being able to go over that first apron. They're able to exceed the $178.7 million first apron because they are sending out more salaries in the trade than they're taking back in. However, because they are combining two players to get a more expensive one, they are now not allowed to exceed the $189.5 million second apron. And when you put everything together, all those salary projections I made for the players, and I also separately had the Warriors trade Kevon Looney so they don't prevent having any dead money on their books, they are able to field the roster just barely below that $189.5 million second apron. Now, this type of trade can also be applied to guys like Kevin Durant and or Jimmy Butler, players that over the past year or so, there have been reports that the Warriors are interested in potentially acquiring. However, I find such a scenario like this extremely unlikely for either of one of these guys. I just don't think the Warriors have enough unless they're going to part with multiple of their young players. But I just wanted to show the mechanics of it. I want to discuss the Warriors' future and try to project them out a year from now. But before I do that, I need to discuss Jonathan Kuminga because he's going to be extension eligible during the offseason. And I think he had a significant improvement and proved that he should be a really good starter in the league. And I think the Warriors definitely need to keep him long term. Now, based on his production last year, his trajectory, and his general position scarcity, I could see the Warriors offering him somewhere between 27 to $30 million a year. So this is a type of extension I could see them offering. I'm sure he's going to command more than this, and because of that, the negotiations could get dragged out until the deadline in October. However, I wouldn't be surprised if he passes on an extension and just bets on himself over the upcoming season. He's only getting better, and another season with strong progression like this could help him make a lot more as a restricted free agent. So I plugged in Jonathan Kuminga with that first year salary I projected and put in Klay Thompson and Gary Payton with second year raises. And when you fill out the rest of the roster, which includes them having their draft pick next year, the roster should be right around the tax. Now, this does not factor in Moses Moody, who is extension eligible as well this offseason and will be a restricted free agent if not extended. And I just can't project him because I don't know what the Warriors are going to potentially offer him. The whole situation just kind of up in the air. He's had a very marginalized role. Brandon Pajemski's come along, and with Klay Thompson potentially coming back, I can even see him becoming a trade candidate at some point. Now, another thing I want to mention is that with Jonathan Kuminga about to get paid, I think Andrew Wiggins' time in Golden State is coming to an end. It just doesn't make sense to pay both of them, especially when they ideally want to play a traditional center and have Draymond Green at the four. And we've already heard some reporting over the past year or two that the Warriors are open to moving Wiggins. And he just at times has reverted to Minnesota Timberwolves Wiggins and even has had some stretches like earlier in the season when he was even worse than that. And his value, it's been at around an all-time low, especially since he just started that new extension. Now, they don't have to trade him this season. They have some time on this. They could potentially trade him a year from now, but just with Kuminga set to get paid, I just think that they're going to move on for him, Wiggins, at some point. Now, beyond this season, it's really hard to project what the Warriors are going to look like, mainly because Stephen Curry is going to be expiring in 2026. That $59.6 million salary is all he's got left, and he can extend this offseason. He can add up to 1 year for $62.6 million. Also worth noting that Draymond has a player option for the following season, and it's just unclear how long Klay Thompson's deal is going to be. So as of now, it seems like 2026 is the unofficial current expiration date on the big three. But I'm sure that if all the guys want to continue playing together, the front office will make it work.